An armed attacker has a significant advantage over an unarmed defender. Weapons can inflict greater damage than empty fists with far less risk to the user. Any object can be used as a weapon as long as the user knows how to utilize it to their advantage. However, any weapon is merely an extension of its user. Once you neutralize the user, the weapon returns to being an inanimate object. In the following demonstrations, the movements are slowed down so that they can be demonstrated clearly to the viewer and do not cause any lasting damage. Students must practice cautiously, with the underlying realization that in a real fight, the effect of surprise and the velocity of the attack will make all the difference. The two most significant challenges that an armed attacker presents are distance and impact. Weapons have a longer reach and can inflict a strike with greater impact. Although a knife does not significantly increase reach, this is an edged weapon capable of cutting and thrusting. A baton can strike from outside the reach of an unarmed person. Although this is not edged like a sword, for the most part it is treated in the same manner. The user's hand must be attacked while the weapon is evaded. A staff has far greater reach than an unarmed person. In this case, the unarmed defender must close more distance to penetrate past the staff's strike zone. For the sake of safe practice, a rubber knife is used. Many practitioners will chalk the edge of these knives to indicate when a cut is made. To counter your opponent attacking with a downward stab, catch his wrist with both hands. Twist his arm, pulling his arm to the side. Do not relinquish control of his wrist. Twist his arm so that the knife point revolves 360 degrees. Keep your arms locked in front of you, twisting from the rotation of your body. End in a kneeling position. This action is executed in one fluid motion. His linear strike down is deflected by the circular twist of your body. Focus on his forearm while evading the knife. To counter your opponent attacking with a straight thrust, catch his wrist with both hands deflecting to the side. Twist his arm over your body, bringing his wrist to the ground. Step aside as you deflect the knife, so that the knife is past your body. Step and pivot to twist his arm. Lock your arms in front of you, twisting his arm with the pivot of your body. Bring your whole body down to a kneeling position to bring his hand to the ground. With a sharp weapon like a knife, it is very important to maintain complete control of the hand holding the weapon. Even a small amount of movement could be enough to inflict damage. Here, Sifu Lam is controlling his attacker's form at both ends. When he relinquishes control of either the wrist or forearm, the attacker is able to stab at his body. Every attack has a counter movement. However, that counter must be applied before the attack reaches its conclusion. To counter too late would be like blocking after you've already been hit. If an opponent succeeds in preventing blood flow to your brain, you will pass out in a matter of seconds. When someone attempts to secure a chokehold, you must protect your throat by covering with your hand. To counter an opponent choking you from behind with a baton, block to cover your throat. Push the baton up with your forearm while using your other hand to pull it down. Free your head, pushing the baton up into his armpit. Step and pivot to free your head, rotating the baton as you turn. Use this twist to cross your opponent's arms around the baton. Your opponent will want to hold on to his baton. Take advantage of his insistent grip to apply this movement. To counter your opponent striking down with the baton, grab his wrist with both hands. Step and pivot to twist his wrist to the other side, then use your shoulder to hyperextend his elbow. Grab his wrist with both of your thumbs pointing towards his elbow. Pivot on your front leg and step into him. Keep your arms locked in front of you, using the pivot of your body to twist your opponent's arm. Bring the weapon down, then up in a circular movement. To counter your opponent striking sideways with the baton, grab his wrist with both hands. Step and pivot to twist his arm, using your shoulder to control his upper arm. Twist his arm so that his weapon points towards the ground. Keep his arm extended to maximize the impact of the twist. Countering a side strike is essentially the same as a down strike. The degree of the twist and the placement of your shoulder adjusts to the position of your attacker. To counter your opponent jabbing with the baton, grab the baton with both hands. Twist the back end of the baton up into his armpit, pushing him down to the ground. Grab with one hand in front of his hands and the other in between. Step in towards your opponent and push into his armpit. This technique is similar to the counter to the chokehold, relying on your opponent's tight grip on the baton. You can escape the lock by letting go of the baton. However, this would give you the weapon and the advantage. To counter your opponent striking low with the baton, step in to close the distance. Grab his wrist and his throat. Pull his wrist to your hip as you extend your forward hand to his neck. Step in close, so even if you miss the block, the baton cannot hit you with the full force of the tip. All of your energy must be committed to getting his throat before he completes the strike. Continue to push forward with your counterattack so that you jam any attempts that your opponent might make towards recovery. If your opponent attempts to remove your grip from his throat, grab his wrist and twist his arm. Cross his elbows to lock his upper body. Continue to twist his arms to upset his balance. Follow the circular movement of his arm to break his grip and establish your grip. Keep his baton arm straight as you twist the other arm. Turn with your opponent as he falls, kneeling down to stay close. Do not relinquish control of his baton hand. At the midpoints of the finger bones in the hand lie 2 pressure points. Using the tips of your fingers, press in firmly to open his grip. Maintain control of his wrist with your other hand. With both hands on his wrist, twist his elbow in and grab the back end of the baton. Pull the back end opposing his fingers. Work against his little finger first, using his hand as a fulcrum. Keep his arm twisted with your other hand to loosen his grip. Place your thumbs against the back of his hand and your fingers against his wrist. Pull with your fingers and press with your thumbs to hyperflex his wrist. Push his palm towards his inner forearm. This movement will serve as a wrist lock as well as a disarm. While holding his wrist with one hand, grab the baton with the other hand and pull down. Work against his little finger first, using his hand as a fulcrum. Keep his hand locked in position. His fingers are the weakest point in his grip. Grab the baton with both hands. Twist the baton, bringing the tip to his shoulder. Press down on his shoulder while lifting the other end of the baton. Use both of your hands to twist the baton. Step in as you press down on his shoulder. As in any choke from behind, block to protect your throat. Using your whole body, twist in towards your opponent, collapsing his arms. Use your free hand to grab his throat. As soon as the weapon crosses your visual field, you must block to protect your throat. By turning your body to face your opponent, you can make it difficult for your opponent to get leverage to strangle you. Grab your opponent's throat with your thumb and forefinger, separating the windpipe from the neck. Extend your arm and hyperextend his back, pushing him off balance. When confronting an opponent with a long weapon, the safest strategy is to stay well out of striking distance. If you choose to counterattack, you must close the distance so that you are inside the strike zone to jam his attack. Grab your opponent's staff while stepping behind him. Pull your opponent forward, upsetting his balance, and spin the staff so his forward arm is locked. Use the staff to press his shoulder to the floor. In this variation, grab your opponent's front hand and spin the staff with your other hand around his arm. Use your upper torso to hyperextend his arm. By spinning the staff around his arm, you force your opponent to relinquish his grip with his back hand. Use the staff to hyperflex his wrist. When your opponent thrusts with the staff, it is better to deflect it to the side instead of retreating out of distance. To counter, grab the staff, then step in and grab your opponent's wrist. Break his front grip and bring the staff into the crook of his elbow. Hyperflex his elbow around the staff, pressing his hand to his shoulder. Grab the staff with your thumb pointed towards your opponent. Press his hand to the ground, trapping his shoulder in between. In this variation, you fail to break your opponent's front grip. Here, bring the staff over his shoulder, using it as a fulcrum. Press down with the staff while lifting his wrist up. Use this technique to upset your opponent's balance. Follow your opponent down to the ground, keeping his arm trapped with the staff. Step in close to your opponent with your chest facing his shoulder. Pivot so that your opponent's body has to travel forward from your body, further upsetting his balance. To evade a side strike, it is best to retreat as in a down strike. Gauge your distance so that you only retreat the minimum distance to avoid getting hit. Close the distance as soon as the staff passes your body. Grab his front wrist and bring your forearm to his shoulder. Pull his wrist to your hip while twisting his arm and pressing down on his shoulder. Pin his shoulder to the staff and pin the staff to the floor. Step in close to your opponent so that your hips are almost touching. Sink down with your opponent as he falls to maintain control of him. Press down on his shoulder with your elbow, making sure that the staff is under his armpit. Pinning his arm to the staff can be more painful than pinning him to the ground. To counter a low side strike, jump over the staff, closing the distance as soon as the staff passes your body. Once you are in close, your opponent cannot follow up with an effective second strike. Without capturing your opponent's wrist, you cannot apply the arm twist. Bring your arm to your opponent's throat to take your opponent down. Get behind your opponent when you close. Step back to upset his balance, then sink to bring him down. Close the distance so that your chest faces his shoulder. As a finishing movement, use your leg to wrap around his torso, further constricting his movements. When both you and your opponent are struggling for control of the staff, pull the weapon to create an opening. Grab his wrist, pushing the staff down to break his grip. Spin his arm to hyperextend his elbow across the staff. Press up on his wrist. Manipulate the staff so that you press down on his arm and up on his waist. Place the staff midway between his elbow and shoulder. Place the tip of the staff across his stomach. Slap his wrist hard to break his grip. Press up with your front hand and down with your rear hand, keeping the point of the stick raised. To counter a thrust with a chair, grab the legs, deflecting the thrust down. Spin the chair to break your opponent's grip. Here you are countering a straight attack with a circular deflection. As your opponent's body leans, close the distance and seize his arm. Follow the momentum of his leaning body to set up an arm lock. This technique is similar to countering a staff attack. With any unusual weapon, the counter techniques are merely extrapolations of similar weapons. Here, it is important to understand the flow of technique, following the inclinations of your opponent's body to expose its weaknesses. In this variation, your opponent does not relinquish his grip on the chair so easily. You have already penetrated past the strike zone of the chair by closing with the turn, so you're committed to this attack. Continue spinning the chair until your opponent releases it. This crosses his arm so that you can grab his rear hand and use it to lock his front arm. Press down on his rear hand so it is positioned between his elbow and shoulder. Place his front hand in the center of his back to lock it. Press his rear hand down, trapping his other arm between his rear hand and the ground. To evade a side strike, retreat as in a side strike or down strike with the staff. Close the distance as soon as the weapon passes your body. Hook his front wrist with your forearm and bring your other arm to his shoulder. Bring your hand to your forearm to lock his arm. Press down on his shoulder. This technique is merely a slight variation on countering a similar attack with the staff. Immediately following the opponent's attack, seize your opponent's front arm and lock it. From the basic weapon shapes presented here, you can extrapolate to many different weapon types by making small adjustments in your technique. An armed attacker has a significant advantage over an unarmed defender. Weapons can inflict greater damage than empty fists with far less risk to the user. Any object can be used as a weapon as long as the user knows how to utilize it to their advantage. However, any weapon is merely an extension of its user. Once you neutralize the user, the weapon returns to being an inanimate object. For the sake of safe practice, a rubber knife is used. Many practitioners will chalk the edge of these knives to indicate when a cut is made. To counter your opponent attacking with a downward stab, catch his wrist with both hands. In the following demonstrations, the movements are slowed down so that they can be demonstrated clearly to the viewer and do not cause any lasting damage. Students must practice cautiously, with the underlying realization that in a real fight, the effect of surprise and the velocity of the attack will make all the difference. Weapon is evaded. A staff has far greater reach than an unarmed person. In this case, the unarmed defender must close more distance to penetrate past the staff's strike zone. The two most significant challenges that an armed attacker presents are distance and impact. Weapons have a longer reach and can inflict a strike with greater impact. Although a knife does not significantly increase reach, this is an edged weapon capable of cutting and thrusting. A baton can strike from outside the reach of an unarmed person. Although this is not edged like a sword, for the most part it is treated in the same manner. The user's hand must be attacked while the weapon